Medfield TV presents Meet the Candidates, interviews with our citizens running for local offices. This series is being brought to you by the joint efforts of Carol Mayer, Town Clerk, Kevin Murphy, Medfield High School Social Studies teacher, and Aditi Tate, Cheryl Dunlay, and the staff of Medfield TV. I am James Colley from Medfield High School. I will be posing questions to the candidate. He will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. Today we are interviewing Mike Marcucci. He is a candidate running for Selectman. This position is for a 3-year term. There is one position open. He is a candidate and he is running unopposed. Mr. Marcucci, your first question. Why do you find it important to lead Medfield's government?
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I have been involved for the past several years as a member of the Warrant Committee, which, as people know, advises town meeting with respect to financial issues and any warrant articles that are up for vote at town meeting. In that role, I've had a chance to see the many different issues that are facing Medfield going forward. And this year, with an open selectman seat coming up, I thought it would be sort of the next step in my service to the town. At the time I pulled papers to run, there weren't any other candidates, and so I figured I couldn't really complain that other people weren't running if I wouldn't go ahead and do it myself. And on the Warrant Committee, we've seen that we're at kind of a key transitional point for Medfield, in particular with the Medfield State Hospital property, which I know we'll talk about later in this discussion. There's issues around the development of downtown and preserving the historic character of downtown. And obviously, from the perspective of the Warrant Committee and the Finance Committee, we're always mindful of the fact that in local government, all of the money that we spend comes out of the taxes that are paid by the citizens of Medfield. Unfortunately, the principal source of revenue are property taxes, which is a regressive tax. And we have to be mindful when we're spending money, when we're managing the government, that we're doing it in the best interest of taxpayers and making sure that we're not spending any more than we need to. And I think there are areas in our town government that we can make more efficient. There's areas where we can be cooperative, both within departments and across departments. And I think seeing that from the Warrant Committee side, I think there's an opportunity to make a difference as a selectman. I think one of the great things about local government is that it's ordinary citizens who have to step forward to be a part of it. Selectman's a volunteer position effectively, and I hope I can bring some of my energy and skills to that position and make a difference for the future of the town, because that's really what local and small d democratic government is all about, which are active citizens engaging in the art of self-government.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on the relationship between the municipal government and the school committee?
I think historically there has been something of a tension between the town government on one side and the schools on the other. And the focus has been too often, I think, on a competition for resources among and between the schools and the rest of the town. I think under Superintendent Marsden's leadership and under the school committee, over the last several years, we've seen an admirable increase in cooperation between the school department and the town government. And I think that has worked to the benefit of the town of Medfield. I think one of the first areas of that cooperation was in the area of information technology. The school department's IT department was combined with the town, so we have one information technology department for the town. And I think the recent ransomware attack that many people have heard about in Medfield demonstrated the foresight that the town and the school department had shown in combining those two things into one function. I think there are other areas where there is overlap, where there have historically been parallel services and parallel roles on the school side, on the town side. And I think where we're not constrained by federal or state regulations, I think the town and the schools should try to work together to provide more efficient services and hopefully save the taxpayers some money, while at the same time providing more effective government services in those areas. So I think it should be cooperative. Obviously, given that we are always constrained by a desire not to impose too much expense on the taxpayers of Medfield, there's always going to be a back and forth between what the priority should be at any given time. But I do hope, as a member of the Board of Selectmen, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, to bring some cooperation and coordination, because it all comes from the taxpayers of Medfield, and we should all be working in their best interest.
Thank you. Being put as commissioner of the police department, what actions would be taken there?
Well, I think in my experience as a resident of Medfield, I think the police do a great job. I think this is an area where I'm going to have a learning curve, and I expect if I'm elected, I'll spend some time with Chief Meany and trying to understand the full scope of the board's responsibilities with respect to the police. In my warrant committee experience, what I'm most familiar with is the police budget and what it's spent on and how it works and how the contracts work and what the drivers are of expense. But I do look forward to taking on, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, the role of the Selectman and serving as also as the Board of Police Commissioners for the town of Medfield. And I think that that's an area where I'm going to have to do some homework and some research and make sure I'm fully informed and ready to go if I am elected on March 28th.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the Medfield State Hospital property?
Well, this is maybe the biggest, certainly the biggest short-term and long-term issue facing the town of Medfield now. And this is an issue that I've been involved with for several years. And I think it's one that we need to bring to some sort of a resolution, and I've said sort of by the spring of 2017. And resolution doesn't necessarily mean a final decision on whatever is going to happen there. But when town meeting voted unanimously to purchase the state hospital property, the overriding theme of everybody who spoke at that town meeting was that what we were paying for, we were paying $3 million, $300,000 a year for 10 years for control of the property. The overriding theme that everybody talked about at that night, and what was a historic meeting for those of us who were there, was that we were paying for control. We were paying so that the town of Medfield would be able to control the future of that property, which is probably the largest undeveloped piece of property that exists in Medfield today and probably will be within our lifetimes. And I think to vindicate that, to make sure that the people of Medfield do have control over the future of that property, we need to bring a proposal or proposals to a special town meeting and let that special town meeting decide what's going to happen with Medfield State Hospital. The State Hospital Committee has done a lot of work, has gathered a lot of information. I think it's a very talented group of people who have put in tons of time on behalf of the town so that they're going to be prepared to develop some sort of a proposal. And I think if I'm elected to the Board of Selectmen, what I would try to do is to help guide those proposals to a conclusion so that whether it's 2 or 3 or whatever number of proposals are put together for the future of the site are laid before town meeting, and town meeting is given an opportunity to decide. And I think whatever proposals are put before town meeting, they have to meet a standard of being feasible in the sense that we can't put a proposal to town meeting that won't work financially or won't work economically, or whether it's a proposal for development, a proposal not to development, or develop it, or something in between. We've got to make sure those are vetted so that we're giving the people of Medfield a real choice at a special town meeting. And that's what I hope to do if I'm elected to the Board of Selectmen, is working with the State Hospital Committee to put before a special town meeting a set of alternatives that are viable. They are not going to do long-term or short-term damage to the town, and that will satisfy some of the town's objectives in the short and the long term, and to give town meeting a real choice in the matter. And that's going to be one of, I think, my main focuses, certainly in the first year on the board, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected on the 28th.
Okay, thank you. And what are your overarching goals for the future of Medfield?
Well, I think we have to, we have to look at how the town is changing, how the demographics of Medfield are changing a little bit, how the demographics of the Commonwealth are changing. In connection with the state hospital site, there's been a lot of discussion about the need for housing for people who are 55 and older, sort of on the full spectrum of people who are still working, and then people who are retired, and then people who need some sort of assistance in their living. And I do think there is a need for that kind of housing in Medfield. I think in planning the future and looking ahead to where what might happen from a development standpoint, we've got to take into account those changing demographics. It would be a shame if longtime residents of Medfield who love the town and who like to stay here don't have viable alternatives. And we've got to do that, of course, consistent with the town's overall character, the historic nature of a lot of our buildings. And so it's got to be done carefully, but I think that's something from a development standpoint we have to look at. We also have to contend with the reality that Medfield gets almost all of its tax revenue from residential property taxes. something about 95% of our property taxes are paid by individual residences. We're never going to have, and I think probably wouldn't want to have, significant industrial or commercial development. But I think we have to be looking for opportunities where there are reasonable locations and responsible places where we can develop to try to generate some additional tax revenue from development that would not fall solely on residential taxpayers. I think we've seen with the addition of some restaurants and some of the growth and the improvements in downtown that there is a market for certain types of commercial properties and businesses in Medfield that can generate not only property tax revenue but also meals tax revenue, which was adopted. The meals tax was adopted a couple of years ago and generates over $100,000 in tax revenue for Medfield, a lot of which comes from people who are not residents of the town but come here to eat. And so I think we need to continue to improve downtown as a focal point where we have the opportunity to develop some of those types of businesses. And one of the issues we've got to address there is parking. As more people want to come downtown, we've got to find places for them to park and places for them to park and walk around. And so I think we've got to look at some of the proposals that are on the table for improving the parking situation. So I think if you look at what I'd like to focus on in the first couple of years, I think certainly focusing on Medfield State Hospital, downtown development, doing what we can to make our government more efficient, and whether that's through collaboration with schools or other towns, and then trying to grow some of our non-residential tax base. And there are some places in town where I think there's a real opportunity to do that.
Okay. I wish to thank Mr. Marcucci for participating in this interview show. Please remember that democracy is not a spectator sport. Please vote at the Center on Icehouse Road on Monday, March 28th, from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m.
The preceding was a production of Medfield TV, Community Shows.